Today's hot topic episode is about whether or not you can fix your metabolism. I don't claim to have all the answers here, but I do want to just review like how the body works, what metabolism even is, how metabolism gets deficient or kind of down regulated, and how to bring that back if you feel like your metabolism is, I'm using air quotes here, broken. Because if your metabolism seems to be lower than it once was, you likely can bring it back. It might take some work, it might take some patience, but there are a high percentage of women, especially I would say in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, especially kind of the last 50 years or so, where we've been told to reduce caloric intake in order to lose weight. We've been told the best way to lose weight is by a calorie deficit or low fat eating. Thankfully, the low fat mantra and that whole craze has seemed to finally leave. And now it's more so, a lot of people see carbohydrates as the enemy. And I know I teach a low carb lifestyle myself, but remember, my population is metabolically challenged. My population that I speak to has some sort of metabolic disease. And honestly, 93% of the American and the Western population does have some sort of metabolic disease. So the vast majority of us, I'm speaking to you. So we want to look at like, what is even metabolism? Like we throw that word around and it's like, do you have any idea what that even means? And basically what metabolism is how you are bringing in energy, how your body is utilizing that energy, how efficiently you're utilizing it. Are you utilizing carbohydrate metabolism? Are you utilizing fat metabolism? Does your body efficiently utilize the energy that you take in? Or, do you have hormonal imbalances where you have high insulin levels all the time and that fat metabolism mechanism is kind of broken? Like you have all of this body fat locked away in your body, but you can't access it because you have high insulin levels. And if you listen to this podcast, that is my primary goal, is to help you rebalance that insulin level so that we can tap into fat metabolism. But metabolism is basically utilizing the energy that you are taking in, utilizing it efficiently, letting the cells be fed and nourished and produce energy. So that's basically what metabolism is. So a lot of us have dieted or used calorie restriction. Lots of us over and over and over for years, decades, and we have messed up our metabolic rates. They maybe once were higher than what they are now. And so we're going to take a look at, what things come into play when we're talking about metabolic rate, what things kind of break metabolic rates or bring down metabolic rates, and then what things you can do to help restore that metabolic rate. And again, what you hear on this podcast, it may or may not work for everybody because some people are just so, metabolically ill that they might need to do a more catered approach, a more targeted approach, a more advanced approach. And all of those people, you can always work with me individually. I have many courses that you can enroll in. And after you enroll in any of my courses, I have a jumpstart, I have metabolic makeover, which is my starter course. I have mealtime mastery, which is just dedicated to nutrition during your eating window. And then I have low insulin academy, which is opening up again quite soon. That's coming up. I take the summer off and put the program on demand only. And then I bring the program back in the fall and I do the program live with you with group coaching on a weekly basis. So get yourself on the wait list if you haven't done so already, because enrollment opens September 5th and it is limited. And I have a lot of people on the wait list this time because I do take the summer off. So the link is in the show notes, or go to fasttoheal.info/LIA waitlist. But getting back to working with me, if you feel stuck after you enroll in any of my courses and you go through the lessons, I want you to have those baseline lessons, because then I know you are learning what you need to in order to start the strategies to the low insulin lifestyle that I teach. I don't want to meet with somebody who has no idea about the basics, and then I'm spending all the time educating you on the basics that you could learn in a course. Learn the basics, sometimes the basics. The Jumpstart is the basics, Metabolic Makeovers, a starter course, and then LIA, or Low Insulin Academy, is more advanced. It has a ton more information in it. I want you to watch those lessons and apply them first. So then you can see what works, what doesn't work, and then you come back and meet with me after you've watched the lesson. So I don't have to sit and spend time educating you one-on-one, where you could have learned those things up front through my lessons. And then after that, then I really can, we can really dive deeper and say, okay, I implemented what I learned in your courses. This really worked well, but this I'm still struggling with. So that's how I have it set up. So I have people ask me every day, like, do you take one-on-one clients? How can I work with you individually? You have to enroll in a course first and get the fundamentals. And then after you enroll in a course, you get all the information you need to schedule follow-ups with me if you so choose. But back to metabolism, let's talk about, like, okay, so we kind of defined what that is, but I want you to think about, I mean, our human brains are just so advanced. It's like, food is not what it used to be for humans. Food is about survival, right? Like, that's what food is for us as humans. It's fuel. It's how we survive. But we are so mentally advanced that food has become so much more than that. It's just not about survival anymore, right? It's about feelings. It's about our family. It's about experiences. It's about a lot of times people, that's what their whole world revolves around. So food is not just about survival anymore. It's about a lot of other things, but we need to think about it as being for us, for survival, and think about how the human body was set up to survive and how that food is regulating us and how our metabolisms do get kind of broken. So we are needing energy at all times, right? It's not like we have an on-off switch in the human body. I mean, we need energy. Our body's working all the time. It is super amazing. There's been times where I just sit and think about, like, all the processes that are going on in my body and all of the organs that are working together. It is mind-boggling, and we don't even know everything about, our metabolism and our organs and what goes on in the human body. So it's really mind-blowing. But really, food is energy. And so we need to treat it as such. And humans were set up to be in feast and famine modes, right? It's like we haven't always had access to food like we do now. I mean, now we just walk to our refrigerator, we walk to our pantry. If we're bored, if something sounds good to us, if we have a craving, if our blood sugar is starting to fall, we just walk a couple feet and take a snack, processed crap in a bag, and eat it and feel better momentarily, but probably later, not so much. But humans evolved in periods of feast and famine, and we don't really have famine anymore, unless, I shouldn't say that, there are some, but for the vast majority of us, we are in feast mode all the time, and our body it's not used to that. It does not excel in feast mode all the time. It's just not how it is. So if we are in feast mode all the time, that's where our high insulin comes. That's where, we start to store more energy. We start to, those stored resources are there for a reason. They're safety mechanisms. That's how the human body is set up. It's set up to store energy for safety purposes, right? Because when humans went into times of famine, then we could tap into our glycogen stores first. That only give us about a day of energy, though. Our glycogen stores is for stored carbohydrate in our liver and our muscle tissues. We burn through that in about a day. So after a day, we need to rely on body fat, right? So we then can turn to body fat, and even thin, healthy weight humans have weeks of body fat to burn. We just need to access it. And when we're talking about a broken metabolism, it's usually broken access to our stored fat, right? It's either broken access to our stored fat, or we've really damaged our metabolic rate. So our bodies kind of operate on, or most people think this, it's not completely proven, but most people think it's like we kind of operate on a set point where your body, like you feel really healthy at a certain weight. And then we can manipulate that if we, kind of go into periods of caloric restriction. We might manipulate that set point. We might lose weight and our set point becomes lower for a time. But if we don't do it in a healthy way, we then, go back to what we were doing before, gain all the weight back. And now we weigh more than we used to. And now we have a new set point. Our new set point might be 20 pounds heavier. So then when you try to lose weight, your body's like, no, thank you. Like I like the weight that I'm at, even if it might be unhealthy. So it's just kind of set up to store fat, but then kind of stay at that set point theory as well. So the problem becomes how the metabolism kind of gets altered or broken. The problem comes when your body perceives a threat, or your body is threatened by fat lowering, by calorie lowering. Short-term threats are okay for the body, but if you do like long-term or longer-term calorie deficiency, caloric restriction, it's going to backfire on you because you are going to decrease your basal metabolic rate, or your BMR. So your BMR is basically the energy that you're using all day long without adding in movement. So if I just sat in this chair all day long and did nothing, my basal metabolic rate would be what I would burn if I had absolutely no movement. So usually you can kind of guesstimate it. There's going to be many variables based on muscle mass, based on sometimes genetics. There's a little bit of a difference with basal metabolic rate. Exercise isn't going to affect your basal metabolic rate because that's in addition to the BMR. But the BMR, there is some variety, and it can be up to 50% variety, but for the most part, muscle mass is what's going to affect that the most. But if you want to figure out like what your BMR is, again, this is not this is not specific to any one person. It's just kind of a general way of finding your BMR is to take your weight in pounds and multiply it by 10. If you're in pounds and in kilograms, you take your weight in kilograms and multiply it by 22. So if I weigh 125 pounds, I would multiply by 10, and my basal metabolic rate is approximately 1,250 calories. Again, that's BMR if you just laid all day long and did no activity. And again, that's going to vary depend on if you're male or female, your muscle mass, a little bit of genetics, and then oh no, that would be more movement. I was going to say, like, if you're a big fidgeter, that would come into play too, but that would be extra movement. So then with the BMR, we then add activity. So if you're exercising 500 calories a day, you're going to burn off approximately 1,750 calories if you are 125 pounds. So these are all guesstimates, but that is where you're going to be somewhere close to that for BMR for most people. So when we have food intake, we always try to balance our food intake with expenditure, right? So we want to balance if we're looking to maintain our weight, if we're looking to maintain our BMR. So if I want to maintain my weight where it is, I'm trying to balance my food intake with my energy expenditure, right? Because the human body is all about balance and homeostasis. It likes to be the same and in balance at all times. It doesn't want temperature going up very much or down very much. It doesn't want hormones going out of balance. I mean, it doesn't want your heart rate going too far out of balance. I mean, it just does everything it can to keep you in homeostasis. So when do these changes become permanent in the BMR? So your body is super intelligent, like the human body. It doesn't do things just to do them, right? It doesn't like store body fat on your belly just to tick you off. It's not like your body's like, oh, she's really trying to lose weight. I'm just gonna store this fat around the liver and cause all this visceral fat. No, your human body is super intelligent. It's always trying to balance for you. It's always trying to keep you at the absolute healthiest that it can. But when is survival threatened? Like we have to think about that as humans. Like when is your survival threatened? And a lot of this comes into, like the calorie restriction that we've tried to do for the last 50 years. Calorie restriction, it doesn't matter what diet you were given, whether it was, I'm just throwing some, these are probably older ones that were more popular a while ago, but like cabbage soup diet or Weight Watchers, or my goodness, I can't even think of all of the popular diets right now, but they're all calorie deficient or calorie restrictive diets packaged in some way, shape, or form, right? It's like you're going to get some meal plan, you're going to get some packaged food delivery to you. You're going to go to Weight Watchers, they're going to give you points to track. It's all packaged in a different way, but it's always a calorie deficit, because that's what we've been led to believe is how we lose weight, is to create a calorie deficit. And that's it. Like we don't have to worry about our hormones. We don't have to worry about any of this other stuff. And so we've done that consistently and we've wrecked our basal metabolic rate. Whereas I teach intermittent fasting and I teach a low carb approach. And the reason why I do this, because then we can balance our insulin levels, and balancing our insulin levels and bringing them back into a healthy range with a low insulin lifestyle will let you then unlock fat burning and tap into your fat stores. Because like I said before, if you have high insulin levels, it doesn't matter how little you eat. You could be eating 1,000 calories. You have super high insulin levels. Insulin is telling your body to store all the time. You're just not going to access that stored body fat. So it's kind of just locked away. So intermittent fasting is very different than calorie restriction, because we're asking our bodies to go a set amount of time without eating so that we can let those insulin levels fall. So a lot of times people think, well, isn't intermittent fasting going to, decrease my metabolic rate over time? How is it different than calorie deficit? It's just, I'm just, it's just a calorie deficit in another package. And the difference is when we intermittent fast, we go longer periods of time without eating so we can bring down our insulin levels. But then when we do eat, we eat until nourishment, we eat until satiety. We're not calorie restricting. We're not saying, oh, I can only have 500 calories for this meal and 600 calories for this meal. It's not about calories. It's about eating to satiety and eating the right foods in the right order with the right macronutrient breakdown, so that our body says, cool, like I was kind of going a long time without eating there. Like, yeah, I went 18 hours. I was getting really hungry, and my storage was starting, my glycogen storage was starting to plummet, but it's all cool now because now I ate, and it doesn't perceive a threat. So where people get into trouble with intermittent fasting is when they intermittent fast or they do some longer fasts, or they think, okay, 16 hours of fasting is good. 3 days of fasting must be better. But then they don't nourish properly when they do eat. So that's where the problem comes in. And that's where intermittent fasting experts and specialists, my book, my courses will help you to see, okay, this is what I have to do once I break my fast. I have to nourish well. My body has to see it is not threatened. And once you can do even a 2-day fast. And as long as you restore and eat in a way that your body says, oh, yes, I was really getting to the point where I was really starting to freak out here. I was going, I want 2 days without eating, but now you're nourished again. It's like, oh, okay. Oh, well, that's okay. Like I lost some body fat there, but now I'm nourished again. So it's all good. So there's no research, like clear research on where this stops, like where your body says, oh, like, I don't like this fasting business. Like now I'm lowering my basal metabolic rate. Some research points to maybe 2 to 3 weeks of fasting. And I have very few clients who are even willing to do more than like a 24-hour fast. But that could permanently damage your BMR if you're doing like weeks of fasting. And I don't recommend that anyway. So diets stop working after, like, calorie deficit diets will stop working after a few weeks, typically like 3 months, and 3 months on a calorie deficit. If you can hang in there for that long, not most people are willing to even follow a calorie deficit for that long. That's where it's like, okay, things are starting to break here. We just don't have enough calories. We don't have enough nourishment. We need to down regulate. And so you lower your caloric intake, or the body lowers its basal metabolic rate. So it doesn't require as many calories to maintain homeostasis. And that's the difference between fasting and calorie deficit. And remember, in a fasted state, your human growth hormone rises. So that protects you against losing muscle mass. So that's a huge difference too. It's like if you're eating 1,200 calories a day in a calorie deficit, but you're eating, maybe you're eating 300 calories 4 times a day, like you're on these little mini meals and snacking, your human growth hormone is not going to be high because you're not in a fasted state. So that's just a calorie deprivation state. So there's a huge difference. So again, going back to that feast and famine, like variation is normal. It's not like our ancestors were, out hunting and gathering, and they said, okay, like I'm going to wait till noon every single day, and I'm going to eat these nuts, and I'm going to, eat this animal meat that is this kill that we got yesterday. They're not like, okay, I have to wait till noon to eat tomorrow. Like, no, like there's got to be some variation in there. And that's when I work with clients inside my courses. I'm like, okay, let's do 16 hours of fasting 3 days a week. Let's throw in 24-hour fast 2 days a week, and then maybe do one overnight fast 1 day a week. That is variation to keep your body guessing. So it's never like you mimic that feasting and fasting cycle. So a lot of times people are like, well, if I do an overnight fast, or if I do a 24-hour fast, I'm just going to end up binging when I do break my fast. And people who have been fasters for a long time know that this isn't true. I see this in myself all the time. I usually break my fast with pumpkin seeds. I just love them. They're high fiber, they're higher fat, they have protein in them. So they don't do much to my blood sugar. And I just like to break my fast with them. What I usually break my fast with. But if you're eating real whole foods, and then maybe I'll eat a salad, or I'll eat eggs after that, and I'll eat some cottage cheese with maybe some berries. Like, I'm not going to overeat when I'm eating real food. It's when you eat processed foods that don't have the nourishment in them, because remember, your body perceives threats. And if it's done a 24-hour or 36-hour fast, and now you're eating crap that's not nourishing the body, you're not eating enough protein to make hormones, you're not eating enough protein to make neurotransmitters, you're not eating enough protein to rebuild the tissue that you broke down and wiped out the yucky stuff in the autophagy process during your fast, but now you're not eating any protein with your meals. You're just eating garbage, crappy carbs. That's a problem too, because now your body is perceiving a threat because it's undernourished. So you might, that's when people run into trouble with binging, coming off their fast when they're not eating the correct foods, or they're eating a lot of ultra processed foods. And of course that's going to happen. And that's going to happen whether or not you're coming off a fast, or if you're, eating your second or third meal of the day. It's like your blood sugar goes wonky, your body doesn't perceive nutrients or nourishment, and so it's just going to keep those cravings going. So that's what I see with my students. That's the only time I really see binging being a problem coming off a longer fast. So again, as long as we don't, our bodies aren't perceiving a threat, usually we can eventually, with intermittent fasting, bringing insulin levels down, we can then access stored body fat and slowly start to burn our own body fat during a fast, nourish well, get all of the nourishment that you need, and then the basal metabolic rate stays put. It doesn't, you don't decrease the basal metabolic rate. So again, if we're in a calorie deficit, and then about 3 months is about all any person can hack, but we go back to eating the way we were before. We go back to 1,800 calories. We'll just kind of, I don't count calories, but we'll just kind of give a generalization. We go back to eating 1,800 calories. Our BMR was now down to 1,200, 1,300 calories, because that's all you ate for 3 months. And now your body's like, oh, wow, I got a lot of food here. I'm packing it away. And then you store that body fat. And that's where those yo-yo diets and calorie restriction and eating packaged foods and all of those calorie restriction packages just fail you. So things that decrease the basal metabolic rate. So we're talking about metabolism, right? Like, is my metabolism broken? Can I fix it? So things that decrease your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, are dieting. I covered that extensively. So calorie deficits for a long period of time. And again, once you regain that weight back, usually you gain more weight back, and now you have a new set point, and now it's even harder to lose weight the next time. Another thing that decreases BMR is aging. So you can counteract most of this, though. I want to be very clear about that. If you do nothing, and if you get less active over the course of time, and you do lose muscle mass, a little bit of muscle mass, it's not a ton, it's just little by little, you lose muscle mass over the course of your lifetime. As you reach a certain age, you become less active. And then women going through perimenopause and menopause become less insulin sensitive. This is super important to remember. So women in their 40s and 50s who are in perimenopause and menopause, and even late 30s, they want to eat like they did when they were teenagers and in their 20s when they were more insulin sensitive. You can't. I know this firsthand. I'm wearing a CGM right now, continuous glucose monitor. I've worn them before. I am sensitive to a lot of carbohydrate. Like, I have to keep mine, 40 to 50 grams of carb per meal is like my max, or my blood sugar goes higher, even if it's healthy food. So women in their 40s and 50s cannot eat like we used to. We're not as insulin sensitive. So we have to increase our protein. We have to increase our natural fat, and we have to keep our carbohydrates at a certain threshold. We could get away with not doing that in our 20s, but the changes in hormones, the falling estrogen, that's predominantly what we're looking at. The falling estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all those changes make us less insulin sensitive. And we, our cortisol can sometimes be, if that's messed up, we're storing more body fat as well. So lots of things to think about. But with the aging process, you can offset this for the most part. I go to strength training twice a week. I know what my body fat is. I have a body fat scale, and it's not much different. If anything, I've put on a little bit of muscle over the last 10 years or so with with lifting heavy things. You gotta lift heavy things as you get older. Don't have to do it all the time, half an hour, 2-3 times a week, but it can be offset. So don't think, oh, I'm aging, I'm perimenopause and menopause, and now I'm just going to get fat and I'm going to lose all my muscle. Like, no, you can counteract that, but you have to stay active. You have to know that the hormonal changes are coming and know what to look for. And then bringing down the inflammation overall is going to help offset this as well. So another thing that decreases basal metabolic rate is insulin resistance, because you can't access your storage fat. You can't access energy. You're not burning energy well when you are insulin resistant. You eat food, you don't utilize it. Your body is like so prone to storing fat that it's just storing energy and fat all the time if you have really high insulin levels. I actually saw the highest insulin this week in one of my students that I've seen, and it was 46. 2 to 6 is optimal. That's where I like to see it. This person was at 46, and 6 to 12 is kind of starting insulin resistance. Over 12 is more advanced insulin resistance. So she's at 46. She's wondering, will the injectables help my insulin resistance? I said, let's go back to basics. Your insulin's at a 46. You need to bring that, the injectables are going to help you because that's what they work on, but there's so many things you can do lifestyle wise to start bringing that insulin level down. Let's do that first. Let's work on the basics first before we look at injectables, because your insulin's so high. We know what the problem is here. It's not like you have an insulin of 9 or 10 where it's like, yeah, you have some insulin resistance. Like, you have insulin resistance. And so you are super inflamed. You're storing fat all the time. So insulin resistance is a storage hormone. It assists the glucose, getting into the cell. But if we're eating excessive glucose, excessive carbohydrates all the time, our energy gets basically locked away. And that's where the broken metabolism comes in. So again, this can be counteractive. Insulin resistance also promotes lipogenesis, or the creation of body fat. We don't usually want that, right? Like, usually we want lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat, and insulin resistance prevents lipolysis. So that's why I'm so, keyed in on helping you get out of an insulin resistant state. And then things that also affect the BMR are your thyroid. I mean, the thyroid is basically your thermostat in your body. It's a metabolic hormone produced in the pituitary. I mean, it's the homeostatic regulator. It makes a lot of decisions. Like, if your thyroid is off, you need to get that back into balance. If you were wanting to get to your best health, like if you have thyroid level, like a sluggish thyroid or thyroid hormones that aren't converting correctly, you need to get that optimized before, like everything else is going to be kind of done in vain if you don't have an optimized thyroid. Excessive fructose and excessive alcohol can also lower the BMR because it can be really hard on the liver. I've done full podcasts on this, how fatty livers produce. It's, fructose in small amounts, like in fruit. The body can handle that just fine. Like, I'm not talking, like, I don't want you to go away from this podcast and say, Shanna said I can never have fruit because of the fructose. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Most of us can handle maybe 1 piece of fruit a day, 2 if you're like very, very active and have no metabolic disease. But if you have metabolic disease, trying to reverse that, like 1 piece of fruit or less is probably what you want to stay with, because excessive fructose, because for high in fructose, the liver is the only organ that can deal with fructose. So not that you need to wipe it out completely, but you do definitely want to completely stay away with things with fructose, high fructose corn syrup, fructose corn solids, anything fructose, sugar. You definitely want to stay away from that because it's going to exacerbate your insulin resistance. Seed oils, basically poisonous to the body. And I need to get an expert on the podcast to just talk about the mechanism of the seed oils and why they're so inflammatory. But some people think that seed oils are even more harmful than sugar. So getting the seed oils out of your diet, if you haven't already done that, you need to start working on that, because again, you could be cleaning up your diet and really eating a lot of healthy foods. But if you're still eating seed oils, you're still eating out in restaurants, you're still eating out in fast foods, you're going to be exposed to seed oils. So seed oils are your soybean oil, your canola, sunflower, safflower, corn oil, cottonseed oil, rice bran, rapeseed. I think I got all of them, but those are highly inflammatory due to how they are processed. So they're processed with high heat, they're bleached, all these disgusting things happen. And then when they get into your body's like, has no idea what to do with them, because they are not natural anymore. They were once, but how they are processed, they are not, they are no longer a natural fat. So you need to get those out of your body, out of your overall food intake. And then things like pesticides, hormone disruptors, so plastics. This is a whole nother podcast. I did do a podcast with Dr. Wendy Trubo about a month or two ago. So you can look back on that. She talks all about pesticides and hormone disruptors and how those get into our endocrine system and wreak havoc. But those can reduce your BMR as well. They can mess up your hormonal network, because now where hormone receptors were going to attach to your cells, they are being blocked by these hormone disruptors, mostly plastic, environmental toxins, those sorts of things. Dysbiosis in the gut might also affect BMR. So dysbiosis in the gut would be like all the bacteria. There's just, there's high levels of certain bacteria that shouldn't be high, low, levels that should not be low. And you just don't have a healthy gut microbiome. That can actually reflect in your BMR as well. And then stress affects everything, right? I talk about it in every podcast, but stress can definitely affect your basal metabolic rate as well. So you have to, it's like, every podcast, I should go back and listen. Like if I binge listen to all my episodes, I probably talk about sleep and stress in every single episode, but it's so foundational and so important. So get your stress managed and make sure you're sleeping. So those are the things that really bring our basal metabolic rate down. And now let's talk about things that can bring your metabolism, your basal metabolic rate back up and restore that BMR. If you're one of those people who has broke it with lots of dieting and all of the things that I've already reviewed, how do you restore a healthier metabolism? And this is not going to happen overnight. I do want to be very clear about that. It's not like you're going to do these things for a week. All of a sudden everything's restored and everything's just happy and all of these amazing things happen in your body. It's a process. You need to be patient. You need to keep working on it. But we need to figure out, and again, I already reviewed this with fasting versus calorie restriction, but to restore metabolic rate, you need to, and if you're trying to lose weight, we need to look at how to reduce calories safely without the perception of a threat there. So if we want to lose weight, calorie deficit, a small calorie deficit is important. If we're eating to nourishment and what our body would expect, we're really not going to lose a whole lot of weight. But if we do the calorie reduction in a way that your body doesn't perceive it and perceive it as threatening, that's where we're going to unlock those fat stores. So again, intermittent fasting is the way to go here, varying that fast. And I do understand not everybody is in a place where they can do longer fasts healthfully, or maybe they're so metabolically broken that they need to start with like 12 hours of gut rest. And then you do all the other things that I talk about in order to safely restore the metabolic rate. So the other thing to remember is we want to restore the metabolic rate and add the intermittent fasting in without hunger, right? So when we do eat, our body needs to feel nourished and satisfied. And we do that with a low carb, healthy fat approach targeted, like hitting our protein targets. So again, everything that I've already talked about, we can't expect to eat junk food and take in all these processed carbohydrates and restore our metabolic rate. We're just not going to do that. So we lower our carbohydrate. I have a carb quiz if you need to know. I always suggest somewhere between 25 and 100 grams of carbohydrates for the vast majority of people. You can go to my carb quiz if you need to know where to start. It's fasttoheal.info/carb quiz. But we need to do low carb, add in healthy fats, and hit our protein targets. Then we're not going to be hungry. It might, your insulin might be really high and it might take a few weeks, but you will be amazed how quickly you're going to feel nourished and full for many, many hours if you eat this way. So then there again, when we are done with our intermittent fast, we need to eat to satiety. Okay. We can't like eat a little bit and say, oh, I really want to lose weight. And then you're hungry all day. Like that's not going to work. That's calorie restriction. It's going to backfire on you after a couple of months. We need to decrease our processed food intake. And another thing that can help with restoring the metabolic rate is to decrease artificial flavoring so that your entire hormonal network can naturally just say, okay, like it's just not overcome with fake things or artificial flavorings. You just want to, if you're struggling with a broken metabolism, you really want to keep those out. And then the second thing would be, like those are reducing calories, all the things that I just said. And then the second thing would be restore normal insulin levels. And I mean, this is what podcast after podcast is here. We want to decrease the high glycemic foods that are going to raise our blood sugar. And then we want to decrease sugar and alcohol. We want to decrease seed oils. We want to avoid pesticides, chemicals, and control our stress response. So that would be how we normalize insulin. The third thing we want to do to restore our metabolism is to restore our microbiome. I'm not an expert at this. I do know the basics of a healthy microbiome and eating a variety of foods, eating some plant fibers. But I will say, and I've had guest experts on with this too, but if your microbiome is off, it can increase your cravings. Like say you have Candida overgrowth, you might be craving sugar, you might be inflamed, it might increase your insulin resistance. But it's not just about like taking a probiotic. I will say that like there is work to be done and you might need to get some gut testing done and see where your microbiome's at. But I will say it's not about just taking some probiotics and saying all is good. But look back at prior podcast episodes for more help with restoring the microbiome. And then the fourth thing would be to control the stress response, so that we can decrease our cravings, decrease our cortisol, decrease our inflammation. Again, wearing the continuous glucose monitor, I had a really crappy night's sleep. One of the first nights that I had the CGM on. And the next day, my baseline blood sugar was like 100. And I'm like 100 to 110, which is really high for me. I was like, what is going on? Is this thing not calibrated? Is it, is it wonky? Did I get a faulty CGM? And I'm like, okay, and I was about to, I do have like a blood sugar monitor, keto monitor here that I have to prick my finger for from BioCoach. I do have one of those. And I was about, I'm like, if this continues tomorrow, I'm going to do a finger prick and test it. But the next day it was, my baseline was like 80s. And I'm like, okay, that's normal for me. And I think it was the sleep deprivation. And thankfully, since that first night, I haven't had a terrible night's sleep. So, it's not like I want to get a terrible night's sleep and compare it, but that can increase your blood sugars by about 20% the next day, like a poor night's sleep, under 6 hours, interrupted sleep. And that's what I had that night. Just a lot of things that went on that night, but my blood sugars were high. I was hungry all day. And then when I did eat, I don't know. I'm still testing. Like I'm testing to see if it was the actual foods that I ate, or if it was just that I was so insulin resistant, because one bad night's sleep makes you insulin resistant the next day. So definitely controlling that stress response, controlling the cortisol, controlling your sleep. And then of course, restore metabolism. Exercise can help. I'm not going to say it's like the main thing that's going to help, but it does help to use up calories, right? Like that's what happens when we exercise a lot. It doesn't really affect the BMR per se, but it does help us to use up calories, to use up glycogen, to use, and make our blood sugars healthier, right? So in a roundabout way, exercise does not affect the BMR, because exercise is in addition to the BMR when we look at overall calorie expenditure, but it's going to, in a roundabout way, help all of these other things, right? It's going to help control our stress response. It's going to help restore our microbiome. Sometimes it may or may not come into play. It's going to help normalize our insulin levels. And it's going to help burn up, extra calories. And another thing that it can do, especially if you're strength training, is to build the muscle, build some muscle mass. And we want to offset that muscle decline we see as we age. So again, it's not going to be a huge thing. It's not going to directly affect the BMR. It's going to indirectly affect it. And so muscle mass does, obviously, it's more metabolically active than fat mass is, but not by a long shot. It's not as metabolically active as our organs are. Like our brain, heart, liver, kidney, and lungs combined make up 80% of our BMR. Isn't that astounding? It's just crazy. Like the human body is honestly so amazing. So those are the basics. Those are the things to think about when you think your metabolism is broken after years and years of dieting, your hormones are wonked, you're aging, you're in perimenopause, you're in menopause. It may seem like there is no hope for me. Like I've completely messed up my metabolism, but taking the steps that I just went over can help. And like I said, it takes a while. It doesn't happen overnight. So give yourself grace. If you mess up a day, no big deal. As long as you're making progress, you are winning. I don't want you to compare yourself to others. I want you to compare yourself to you. If you mess up one day, make the next day better. So I hope that helped you to better understand BMR, what it is, and how to correct it if you think that yours is, lower than it was, or it has been compromised in some way. I'll see you back next week.